People hear the words affordable home in Tennessee, and they usually picture one of three things. A mobile home, sitting on land they do not own. A collapsing fixer with a tarp stretched across the roof. Or a house so far from a hospital, grocery store, and basic services that the cheap price stops feeling cheap the moment they actually try to live there. But that is not the whole picture. Get away from the most famous zip codes. Move beyond the neighborhoods already discovered by investors, tourists, and second home buyers. And Tennessee can still surprise you. There are brick houses with real yards, old cottages with porches, farmhouses with barns, homes sitting on multiple acres, houses where every bedroom is on one level, and even a few properties priced for less than many Americans now pay for a new pickup truck. The important question, though, is not simply which house has the lowest price, because that is where cheap home hunting can become dangerous. A $70,000 house with failing plumbing, a bad foundation, an uninsurable roof, and 20 years of deferred maintenance can become far more expensive than a $150,000 house where the difficult work has already been done. A tiny property tax bill can look wonderful until you discover that the house needs a new HVAC system, electrical panel, septic system, roof, and structural repairs. So the smartest way to look at affordable Tennessee housing is not just to ask what the listing price buys. You have to ask what kind of buyer each property makes sense for, where the hidden risk may be, and whether the house offers something increasingly rare in America. Not just a cheap purchase price, but a believable path to affordable ownership. And that distinction matters because one of the least expensive homes you can find may not actually be the best bargain, while one of the more expensive rural properties may reveal the real advantage of shopping in overlooked Tennessee markets. Start with the kind of property many buyers assume has already disappeared. Imagine turning off the main road, following a paved drive beneath mature shade trees, and arriving at a brick home surrounded by roughly 16 acres of Tennessee land. Not a tiny lot being marketed as acreage. Not a narrow strip running behind a subdivision. Real space. The home itself is the kind of property that begins making sense the moment you think about how people actually live. The kitchen has substantial cabinet and counter space, an island, and enough room to prepare a real family meal without turning every available surface into temporary storage. Nearby, a separate dining room gives the house something many newer floor plans have quietly eliminated: a place where people can actually sit around a table without being part of the kitchen. The living room is anchored by a fireplace, but the feature that changes the feeling of the room is a large bay window. On a suburban lot, a big window may look directly into another house. Here, it looks toward land you control, and that difference is difficult to price. All three bedrooms are on the main floor. For a younger buyer, that may simply feel convenient. For someone thinking about retirement, knee problems, aging parents, or staying in the same home for another 20 years, it can become one of the most valuable parts of the floor plan. Then there are the outbuildings. A two-car garage with workshop space, another separate shop, additional storage, and enough room for tools, equipment, woodworking, restoration projects, a small business, or simply all the things that become difficult to keep when every suburban garage is already full. At a price just under $290,000, this is not cheap. In the same way, a $35,000 cottage is cheap. But that is exactly why sticker price alone can mislead people. A buyer here is not comparing only house to house. They are comparing a house, 16 acres, workshop, space, privacy, and the possibility of using the land in ways a quarter-acre subdivision lot simply cannot offer. The caution is obvious. Acreage creates responsibility. Fencing needs repair. Trees fall. Driveways need maintenance. Outbuildings age. Rural properties may rely on wells or septic systems, and those systems need to be inspected carefully. But for the right buyer, this is the kind of property where the higher purchase price may actually buy a lower friction life because you are not immediately asking where to build a shop, where to store equipment, or how to buy more land later. Much of the expensive infrastructure is already there. Move east, and the value equation changes completely. Now, imagine roughly 5.5 acres, positioned high enough to look across layers of green Tennessee terrain, with a home placed where the view changes the experience before you even step inside. The house itself may be a manageable 2-bedroom, 2-bath layout, which immediately eliminates it for some families, but could be exactly the right amount of house for a couple, a retiree, or someone downsizing from a larger suburban property. The room that matters most is the sunroom, surrounded by glass and pointed toward the valley, the kind of place where morning coffee stops being something you drink while checking email and becomes part of the reason you chose the property. But the more important features may be the ones that do not photograph as well. A whole house generator, backup heating options, a private well, and a finished or conditioned outbuilding that could function as a workshop, office, exercise room, or studio. Those are not glamorous listing features, but they can completely change the reality of rural ownership. A beautiful mountain property becomes less romantic the first time the power fails for 2 days. A detached building becomes much more useful when it is actually comfortable in January and August. A garden becomes more valuable when there is enough land and infrastructure to support it. Add a pool, fenced areas, and privacy, and the property begins to offer a combination that is difficult to reproduce somewhere else. At around $250,000, the hidden question is not whether the number sounds cheap. It is what you would have to spend to recreate the setup. Buy raw acreage, drill a well, install backup power, build a workshop, add fencing, construct a pool, and then build a house with a view. And suddenly, the comparison changes. But mountain properties require disciplined due diligence. Road access matters, drainage matters, slope matters, insurance matters, internet service matters, well output matters. The view that looks perfect in July should also be considered in January during storms and after several days of heavy rain. The right rural buyer does not just fall in love with the horizon, they inspect everything underneath it. Then there is the kind of house that appears far less dramatic at first glance, which may be exactly why it is interesting. A simple brick ranch, roughly 2.5 acres, mature trees, a quiet setting, 3 bedrooms on the main floor, and nothing about the exterior trying to become an Instagram post. Then you discover the basement. A full basement running beneath the house can completely change the usefulness of an otherwise ordinary ranch. Even unfinished space has value when it provides storage, a workshop, storm protection, mechanical access, or the possibility of future finished square footage, depending on local codes, moisture conditions, ceiling height, egress, and the quality of the structure. This is the kind of house that often gets overlooked because buyers shop with their eyes first. They see an older kitchen, a familiar brick exterior, and a floor plan without a dramatic vaulted great room. But boring can be financially beautiful. A simple roofline is easier to understand. Brick can reduce some exterior maintenance. One-level living appeals to a wide range of buyers. A basement can provide utility without requiring another detached building. The biggest caution is moisture. A basement is only an asset if water is being managed properly. Buyers should look for staining, musty odors, efflorescence, previous waterproofing sump systems, drainage conditions, and evidence of repeated intrusion. A giant underground space is not free square footage if every major storm turns it into a problem. Still, for someone who wants a practical house rather than a showpiece, this kind of property can quietly outperform more photogenic homes over time. Then the housing story becomes more unusual. From the outside, one property still carries the silhouette of a barn, with a gambrel-style roof, darker exterior materials, and the shape of an agricultural building, rather than a conventional suburban home. Inside, however, the character changes completely. The ceiling rises into the roofline. Warm wood follows the shape of the structure. A loft looks down toward the main living space. A fireplace and natural textures make the interior feel closer to a mountain lodge than a converted utility building. The kitchen is where the transformation becomes convincing, with shaker-style cabinetry, butcher block surfaces, a farmhouse sink, open shelving and materials that fit the building instead of fighting it. That matters. One of the most common mistakes in unusual homes is forcing a conventional suburban interior into a structure that wants to be something else. When the finishes respect the building, the home feels intentional rather than improvised. Even more important, major mechanical work had already been addressed, including plumbing, electrical work, and a relatively recent HVAC system. This reveals one of the most important lessons in affordable housing. Paint is cheap. Appliances are visible. Countertops get all the attention, but the systems hidden behind the walls are where affordable homes can become expensive homes. A beautiful $100,000 property that immediately needs a roof, rewiring, plumbing, replacement, heating equipment, drainage work, and structural repair can destroy a renovation budget before the buyer ever reaches the fun part. A more expensive property with sound systems may offer a much safer path. A converted barn on several wooded acres can provide privacy and character that would be difficult to reproduce in a conventional neighborhood. But unconventional houses also create unconventional questions. Financing may be less straightforward. Appraisals can become difficult when there are few comparable properties nearby. Insurance companies may ask more questions. Future resale depends on finding another buyer who appreciates the same unusual design. That does not make the property a bad choice. It simply means the buyer should understand that uniqueness is both the advantage and the risk. Then consider the opposite kind of character. A home dating back to the early 1900s, with the proportions and details modern builders rarely reproduce because reproducing them is expensive. A covered porch. Tall windows, higher ceilings, more formal room separation, and the kind of exterior that immediately tells you the house belongs to another era. Inside, there is the feeling many people spend large renovation budgets trying to create in newer houses. Substantial rooms, traditional circulation hardwood fireplaces, and architectural detail that does not come from a catalog. One large historic property even offered 4 bedrooms on the main floor, an especially unusual layout for an older home. That creates an interesting opportunity, because historic houses are often beautiful but inconvenient for aging buyers when all the bedrooms are upstairs. A large old house that keeps major daily living spaces on one level can preserve character without requiring constant stair use. A location inside a real town, rather than isolated deep in the country, can also be ideal for buyers who want affordability without giving up medical access, restaurants, shops, and a sense of community. But this is where romantic thinking has to stop for a moment. A house built more than a century ago should be inspected like a house built more than a century ago, not like a new construction home with prettier trim. Electrical service may have been updated in stages. Plumbing can contain materials from multiple generations. Foundations can show movement. Old windows can be beautiful and inefficient. Roof framing, chimneys, moisture pests, previous renovations, and insurance eligibility all deserve attention. The purchase price may be attractive, and the square footage may be enormous for the money. But the buyer needs a repair reserve. That does not mean avoiding old houses. It means buying them with your eyes open. Another brick ranch offers a different kind of value. From the road, it looks relatively ordinary, but the main living space opens into a cathedral ceiling with exposed structural character that gives the interior a completely different identity. 3 bedrooms remain on the main floor. There is additional flexible space for an office hobby room or guest use. Outside, the land is level enough to be usable rather than merely impressive on paper. That distinction matters more than many buyers realize. 5 steep acres may provide privacy, but very little usable ground. 3 level acres may give you a garden workshop access room for animals, play space, parking, or future outbuildings. The house may need cosmetic updating, but cosmetic updating can be one of the safest ways to buy below the price of a fully renovated property. Old carpet is visible, paint is visible. Dated light fixtures are visible. Those problems are emotionally powerful in listing photos, but often technically simple. Buyers should worry far more about what cannot immediately be seen. A house that looks dated but has a sound roof, dry foundation, functioning mechanical systems, and good structural condition may be a far better opportunity than a freshly renovated property where cosmetic improvements are hiding bigger problems. This is also the type of house where patience can create equity. Move in, live with the space, replace what actually bothers you. Avoid the temptation to tear out every functional surface because social media says a home must look finished on closing day. Affordable ownership becomes much easier when the buyer does not immediately finance a second house inside the first one through unnecessary renovations. Then there is the smaller 1940s cottage, the kind of house that may sound less impressive on a spreadsheet because it has only 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. But there is a reason cottages continue to attract buyers. They are understandable. Less roof area, less interior volume to heat and cool, fewer bathrooms to remodel, less flooring to replace, fewer rooms to fill with furniture. Smaller does not automatically mean cheap, but smaller can make the ongoing cost of ownership easier to control. Add unfinished attic or basement space, and the owner gains storage workshop potential and flexibility without being forced to finish and heat every square foot immediately. Put that cottage on a larger in-town lot with covered outdoor space and storage, and it can become a sweet spot, enough town infrastructure to make daily life easy, but enough land to avoid feeling trapped between 2 fences. The limitations are real. 1 bathroom works beautifully until 2 people need it at the same time every morning. 2 bedrooms may be perfect for a couple, but limiting for a growing family. Older cottages can hide electrical insulation crawl space and plumbing issues that need careful evaluation. Still, the simplicity is part of the appeal. Not everyone needs 2,800 square feet. Many people simply need a comfortable place they can afford to maintain. Then the equation changes again when you move into Memphis, because affordable home ownership looks very different when acreage is no longer the main goal. A relatively modern brick home with 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and a 2-car garage, priced below $125,000, changes the conversation. You are no longer buying 16 acres. You are buying access. Access to jobs, hospitals, services, entertainment, airports, and established infrastructure. For a buyer who still works, that may matter far more than owning a barn. A house from a more recent construction era may also provide a very different ownership experience from a century-old farmhouse. It may need cosmetic attention, but a functional floor plan and more modern systems can make the property much easier to understand. This is where affordable housing becomes intensely local. A city property should never be judged only by the city name or even the neighborhood name. Conditions can change block by block. Insurance costs can vary. Crime patterns can vary. Property taxes, nearby development, school zones, flood, exposure, rental, concentration, and resale demand all matter. A house can be a bargain and still be wrong for a particular buyer. Anyone considering an urban bargain should visit at different times of day, drive the surrounding streets, check publicly available local information, speak with qualified local professionals, and evaluate the immediate block rather than relying on a wide map view. But the underlying point remains powerful. For buyers priced out of many American cities, a real 3-bedroom brick home with a garage at this level can represent a fundamentally different financial life. Not luxury, not perfection, ownership. Return to the countryside, and a 1930s farmhouse can offer another form of value entirely. Weathered exterior character, a metal roof, a long front porch, original wood flooring, a fireplace, and enough interior space to feel like a real family home rather than a novelty cabin. Then behind it sits a multi-story barn with substantial utility potential. This is where property value becomes difficult to summarize with bedroom count. A buyer who does not need a barn may see maintenance. A buyer who restores equipment, runs a small workshop, stores machinery, keeps animals, builds furniture, or needs serious project space may see tens of thousands of dollars in infrastructure already standing. There is no universal definition of a good deal, because value depends on what you would otherwise have to build. A farmhouse priced around $120,000 with a serious barn can be extraordinary for one buyer and completely wrong for another. The mistake is assuming that age automatically equals quality or disaster. Neither is true. Some century-old homes are remarkably solid. Some have been poorly modified for decades. The inspection has to separate character from condition. Original hardwood is character. An active roof leak is condition. A beautiful barn is character. A failing foundation under that barn is condition. A wood stove may be charming, but improper installation can become an insurance and safety problem. This is the kind of property where bringing the right inspectors can matter more than negotiating a few $1,000s off the price. Then the numbers fall below $100,000, and this is where they start becoming emotionally dangerous. A large, turn-of-the-century home for roughly the price of a new luxury SUV sounds almost impossible. High ceilings, French doors, hardwood decorative fireplaces, a clawfoot tub, a substantial kitchen, large bedrooms, and nearly 2,000 square feet, for a price around $99,000, can make the price per square foot look almost unbelievable. But cheap square footage is still square footage you have to maintain. A large old home can require more roofing, more paint, more flooring, more windows, more HVAC capacity, and more furniture. The question should never simply be, how much house can I buy? The better question is, how much house can I comfortably own? Still, these properties illustrate something important about small-town America. In markets where population pressure is lower, buyers may still find architecture and space that would command dramatically higher prices elsewhere. That creates opportunity for people whose income is portable, whose retirement is not tied to a major metro, or whose work allows them to live farther from the most expensive employment centers. But affordable small towns need to be evaluated as places to live, not just places to buy. How far is the nearest hospital? What happens when you need a specialist? Is broadband available at the actual address? What are the property insurance options? How strong is resale demand? What happens if your employment situation changes? Can you age in the home? The best cheap house is one that still works when life changes. Then comes a brick house priced around $65,000. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, central heating and air, functioning utilities, and a fenced lot for the price of many vehicles. That is extraordinary. But it is also exactly the kind of listing where discipline matters most. At $65,000, buyers may become afraid to ask difficult questions because they fear someone else will purchase the property first. But the lower the price compared with the surrounding market, the more important it becomes to understand why. Is it condition, location, deferred maintenance, a title issue, insurance difficulty, neighborhood dynamics? A bargain can absolutely be real, but cheap housing punishes rushed decisions. For an owner-occupant with the right expectations, a small brick home can create a low-cost path into ownership. For an investor, the numbers may also appear attractive. Neither buyer should skip due diligence simply because the total purchase price feels low. Finally, there's the number that gets shared. The number people send to a friend with the message, "Look what you can still buy." Around $34,900 for a small 1930s cottage with 2 bedrooms, roughly 1,000 square feet, a front porch, a rear porch, connected utilities, and natural gas service in a real Tennessee town. For less than the price of many new trucks, a buyer could potentially own a real little house. The possibility is remarkable, but this is where the most important question finally has to be answered. Is the cheapest house actually the best deal? Not necessarily, because the real advantage of affordable housing is not always the lowest purchase price. It is the lowest total cost of creating a safe, comfortable life. A $34,900 house that needs $80,000 of work is a very different financial decision from a $135,000 cottage that is already comfortable. A $99,000 historic home with significant deferred maintenance may eventually cost more than a $165,000 brick ranch needing only cosmetic changes. A $250,000 rural property with a well, generator, workshop, fencing, and usable acreage may offer better value to one buyer than purchasing a cheaper house and trying to add all of those things later. This is the insight that gets lost when people shop only by price. The expensive parts of a house are often not the beautiful parts. The roof, the foundation, drainage, electrical service, plumbing, heating and cooling, water supply, sewer or septic, access, insurance eligibility. Those systems are the invisible architecture of affordability. When they are already working, a modest home can remain affordable. When they are failing, a cheap house can consume savings faster than a mortgage. That is why some of the most interesting Tennessee opportunities are not necessarily the $35,000 or $65,000 properties. They may be the houses where the difficult infrastructure already exists. The house with 16 acres and multiple useful buildings. The mountain property with backup power and a working well. The barn conversion, where major mechanical systems have already been updated. The brick ranch, where the needed improvements are mostly cosmetic. These properties demonstrate something bigger than the individual listings. Affordable ownership has not completely disappeared, but it has moved. It has moved away from the famous neighborhoods, away from the places already packaged for national buyers, and away from the zip codes where everyone is trying to buy the same renovated house. In many parts of Tennessee, the trade is still available. You may give up immediate access to a major airport. You may drive farther for specialized healthcare. You may live in a town your friends have never heard of. You may take responsibility for acreage, an old roof, a private well, or a house built before your grandparents were born. But in return, you may get something increasingly difficult to buy in the most expensive parts of America. A front porch that belongs to you. A workshop. A real yard. A few acres. A house without a crushing monthly payment. Or simply enough financial breathing room to stop feeling like your home owns you. The smart way to shop these markets is not to chase the lowest number. Start with the life you actually want. Do you need a hospital nearby? Do you want to age on one floor? Can you maintain acreage? Do you need a workshop? Are you comfortable renovating? Do you have cash reserves after closing? Can you handle a well and septic system? Would you rather own a smaller house in better condition than a giant house that needs years of work? Then look at the systems: roof age, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, foundation, water management, insurance, taxes, internet, road access. Only after that should you get emotionally attached to the porch. Tennessee still has homes that can make people in more expensive states stare at the price twice. Some offer land, some offer history, some offer a way into a real city. Some offer nothing more complicated than a paid-for roof and a little yard. But the best bargain is rarely the house with the most dramatic price tag. It is the house whose problems match your abilities, whose location matches your life, and whose total ownership cost leaves enough money for you to actually enjoy living there. That is the difference between buying a cheap house and building an affordable life. So which would you choose? The acreage, The mountain view, the converted barn, the historic home, or the little cottage you could potentially buy for less than the price of a new truck. And more importantly, how far would you be willing to move to own a home without spending the next 30 years feeling trapped by the payment?